All right. So,
Wow.
welcome everybody. I am so honored and excited to have the amazing mezzo-soprano Kirstin Chavez joining us today. Um, for those of you who are Café Ludwig regulars, you might recognize her. I actually met her when she performed with our principal violist Meredith Crawford and Orli Shaham doing the Brahms two songs for viola, voice, and piano. I think it was last 2 seasons ago. One season
One
ago.
season ago.
One
Yeah,
season ago. Feels like many lifetimes ago
I
after this
know.
pandemic. Anyway, it was amazing. And we had this great dinner afterwards, and it was great to get to know her. And I'm just so excited. Thank you, Kirstin, for coming on.
Oh God, it's a joy. It's a joy to be here with you.
Well, we are very honored. So before we get started, a reminder, yes, Amir, it is like Groundhog Day. Life
Groundhog
is
Day.
um, just as a reminder, if you have any sort of questions for Kirstin, we will try to get to as many as we can throughout the hour and save some time at the end. You can find there's a Q&A button in the Zoom app where you can submit them, or you can submit them in the chat, or for those of you on Facebook, you can submit them in the comments, and we will do our very best to field those. I also want to thank our partnering restaurants. We've got Hendrick's Restaurant and Bar in Laguna Niguel, Toast Kitchen and Bakery in Costa Mesa, Provenance in Newport Beach, Haven Craft Kitchen and Bar in Orange, Descanso Restaurant in Costa Mesa, and Adia in Irvine. And they are all offering various specials and deals in conjunction with these mixers. So if you're near them or hungry or thirsty, definitely give them some support. Okay, so just by way of introduction a little bit, Kirstin has just a fascinating, if you haven't read her biography, I suggest you go do so. She grew up in New Mexico and Malaysia, and ended up studying at the University of New Mexico and the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. The list of competitions that she has won is formidable, to put it mildly, including from the Sullivan Foundation, the George London Foundation, Opera Index Foundation, the Jensen Foundation, and the Met Opera National Council auditions. She has performed literally all over the world. At the Met, right here, Opera Pacific, San Diego Opera, the clip we saw at the beginning, which was the Seguidilla from Carmen at the Graz Opera in Austria, which I definitely want to talk to you about. Spent a summer there and it was amazing. And like I said, she's just a prolific artist, both on the opera stage and the concert stage, and as a teaching artist. So with that said, very excited to dive in. So can you tell us a little bit about the performance we saw at the beginning?
Oh gosh, Ben, that was a life-changing performance. It was a production. It's actually my first time performing in Europe. And the opening night was on my birthday. So they had a big cake after. It was like I was a princess in a fairyland. But it was a really bizarre take on Carmen. So if you noticed in that clip, it was actually taking place, the story was taking place in an art museum. And the different chorus members, the male chorus and the female chorus, would all come out of paintings.
Oh,
and
wow.
I myself came into a painting. I was, as Carmen, I was the cleaning lady of the museum. And Don José, my tenor, was the security guard. And we didn't really get along at first. And so we were arguing constantly. And then we both fell into a painting of Carmen. And I tried the whole story to get him to stay in that world with me because it was really cool. But he kept wanting to go back to like the real world. Anyway, it was really interesting because it was my first time singing in Europe. Most of the cast were German speaking. And so when the director gave the das Konzept, the concept of the production at the beginning, I understood approximately 3% of what he said. And it was days later where it was like we were doing a staging and he was speaking in English to me and he's like, okay, now at this point, this is where you take your clothes off and then you climb up this ladder. And I'm like, that must have been in the 97% that I missed that other day. anyway, it wasn't that bad, thank God. But it did motivate me to go twice a day to the gym, just to be sure. But it was a really amazing show. At the time that we opened, we had an American as Carmen, we had a Frenchman as Don José, an Australian as Micaela, a Mexican as Escamillo, a Hungarian as Frasquita, a Korean as Mercedes, and the list goes on.
Wow.
It was mind-blowing and wonderful and difficult and wonderful. I had to sing the Habanera, which is the most famous tune, with a mop in my hand. And that felt like a blow to my ego. But once I embraced it, boy, we went with it. And it was the audience loved the show. We brought it back multiple times. Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It was cool.
So I'm curious, given what you're saying about, obviously, even when you're performing a very standard opera like Carmen or, Verdi opera, whatever, I'm sure times when you get to the production and the staging has been very, reimagined and is a far cry from what, maybe is standard practice or what it originally was. I'm wondering, as a singer, do you get any input into developing your character within those worlds? Or is it pretty much something that you show up and the director has decided this? And what does that feel like to sort of have to inhabit sort of a new world and paradigm for an opera that maybe you already know really well?
Yeah.
Because of the new setting and new take on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can tell you that it kind of almost entirely depends on the director and what he has done. This particular production that we were doing in Graz was the first time I'd ever experienced having to be second or third in place of importance as far as the show is concerned. In this case, the most important thing about this production was das Konzept, the concept of the show. And it was difficult. I knew Carmen very well by that point, already had done it quite a lot, and love it. And so to be, basically the concept was number one in the hierarchy. Don José was number two because the director's concept was all about Don José kind of going crazy. And so Don José was number two, and I was merely a supporting character.
That's interesting.
Like I said,
supporting title character.
Right? So it was a blow to my ego, and I had a hard time at first. But when I realized it was my ego that was getting in the way, I was able to kind of get past that. And really the amazing thing was that the director was so incredibly gifted. His name is Stefan Herheim, and he's actually originally from Norway. And he had thought of everything, had changed everything, but had thought of everything to the point where it all held water. It all ultimately made sense if you saw it in his version. And, I had no choice but to go with that. In other situations, I've had a harder time because in other situations, it seems clear to me that the director maybe has ulterior motives or doesn't know the show as well as I do, which is totally reasonable. I have, having done it quite a lot. And so in some cases, I might say, you know what, I just have a different idea. I try to be very easy to work with. I try. And, what's amazing is the second time I was doing Carmen, nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. But the 52nd time I was doing Carmen, people were like, oh, maybe we should let her talk and, at least imagine. So it's gotten easier. I can say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say there's a difference, like, dealing with that sort of thing, like in Europe versus in the US versus other places?
Well, again, I think this particular production in Graz is probably not unique in Europe, where again, the concept is really critical. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of instances where directors will dramatically change how an opera is told and the time, place, setting, all of that. And so when they really make those severe changes, you don't really have a choice but to go along for the ride.
Yeah.
And I find that to be more often the situation in Europe than here in the United States. Maybe it's because they've had them around longer, you know, and audiences are like, oh, that again, that old thing, can't we shake it up? And so the directors are like, yeah, sure, I'll just set it on, you know, Mars and it'll be great. So.
Certainly different.
Yeah.
So obviously Carmen is one of your specialties. You're super well known for it. You've performed it a lot. Do you have any other favorite roles that you've done?
You know, amazingly, I would have to say my next favorite role seems to be polar opposite, and yet there are similarities. And that is the role of Octavian in Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier. And Octavian is the rose bearer, so the title role. He is a 17-year-old count. And so again, as a mezzo-soprano, sometimes we play boys. You know, it's one of the hazards of the job. But actually, I really love it. I mean, I study, you know, early on when I started doing what we call pants roles. There are a lot of them in the repertoire for mezzo-sopranos. And early on, I realized I had to pay attention to how do boys walk, you know, how do they talk? How do they hold their hands? And I was really proud of the fact that, you know, I was able to kind of get it down to a large degree. I remember the first time I did Octavian, I was super proud of, you know, I looked very masculine and I was like, man, that was like a badge of honor for me. And then I remember watching the video of the show a while after it had finished. And I was like, wow, yeah, I really did well with that, which is, you know, saying a lot because we performers, we watch ourselves perform and it's just horrible. But there was a lot I was really happy with. And then at the very end, I go running off with my new girlfriend, Sophie. And we went running off stage and my arm swang behind me like a girl. I was so disappointed. I was like, oh my God, I had it for 3 hours and only at the last moment I gave in. But it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny though. Are there roles that you haven't gotten a chance to do yet that you really sort of have your eye on?
Yes. And that would be, and let this be thrown out to the universe so that it may come to pass. It's the role of Dalila in Samson et Dalila, Samson and Delilah, by Camille Saint-Saëns. And the role of Dalila is a lot of famous arias that she sings. She is, the music is absolutely divine. And you guys know Saint-Saëns, oh my God. The story, I'm a little bit nervous about the story, to be honest, because the role, she's extremely powerful as a woman, which I definitely migrate to. But she can be played very, I think, two-dimensional, in the sense that you can be lulled into thinking as an audience member that she is only out to get Samson and any kind of sensuality or whatever, is just using him, you know, and I don't want to play her that way. I want her to be a bit torn about her mission to bring him down. So I'm hoping that when I get to do it, that the director will go with me a little bit in that direction.
And so when you think about something like that, like motivations behind a character, you know, because obviously the music is set, the music has been the same, you know, so I'm assuming it has a lot to do with the physical, you know, how you move, how you sort of, like, it's the acting. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. And you know, as you know, Ben, there are a lot of different ways you can say a line. You can be like, oh, I love being here with you. Or you can say, oh, I love being here with you. You know, oh, I love being here with you. So a lot of different ways to play that. And so they're the same words, but with a very different underpinning underneath. And I think you know, a lot of the opera roles, the big juicy ones, have some room for interpretation. And I'm always going to migrate toward a more three-dimensional playing of a character. I think some of the great opera roles, if they're sort of reduced to 2 dimensions, we've really cheated our audience in that event. And I'm not into that. Yeah. I consider myself 50% actor, 50% singer, and they both have to be really, really good. But in order to be able to flesh that out, I've got to make a character really believable. And that's my job, to make a believable storyline through my character from beginning to end.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's, you know, to me, that's one of the most compelling things about opera. You can have those nuances in terms of how you deliver a line, but also how you move as you deliver a line, or
yes.
You know, there's so many more dimensions to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in addition to sort of these blockbuster standard roles, one thing that really struck me when I was sort of doing my research was how many new operas that you have either premiered or, you know, at least done some of the first performances, like very new operas like Dead Men Walking by Jake Heggie, super great, famous opera. Operas by Tobias Picker. I'm curious, how different is it to work on a role like one of those when you don't have the weight of tradition, sort of like something like Carmen? Obviously there's a very long history of performance practice with that, and you know, sort of certain expectations probably from audiences and directors and conductors. Do you find that you prefer one way or the other, or is it very different when you're sort of almost originating a role?
You know, it's super different, Ben. I don't know that I prefer one over the other necessarily, except that if I find myself in a situation where I'm doing a role that has been around a long time and the director and I fundamentally disagree about how it should be interpreted, then I'd much rather do a new role. So it can depend on the situation a little bit, but it is interesting. I will tell you that the second time I sang Carmen was at Kentucky Opera. And I'd already lived with Carmen for a number of years at that point. I certainly wasn't thinking of myself as an expert, but you know, I had spent a lot of time with it, knowing that, you know, I wanted to make that a signature role. And nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. And in fact, even friends in the cast said to me, "Oh, if only so-and-so were doing this role." That would, I mean, it was horrible to have such a barrier that they couldn't imagine that maybe I had something to offer. Thankfully, I'm no longer in that situation because it was not fun. But the flip side of that then is to be in totally uncharted waters. And you know, something interesting, like doing Dead Man Walking, that was based on a book and based on a real person when I played Sister Helen Prejean. Doing something like, let's see, what else have I done? Good grief. Oh, Thérèse Raquin by Tobias Picker, again, based on a book. So there are ways to get some insight as to the character. But when I played the role of Glenda in We Shall Not Be Moved, which Opera Philadelphia put together, which has been a life-changing experience as well. I think it's still available to watch if you go to Opera Philadelphia's website. It's that'll make you stop and take notice. But Glenda, in this case, she was a Hispanic cop from Philadelphia, having grown up kind of in the slums of Philadelphia, and you know, the story went in a very specific direction, but from a character standpoint, I felt really a bit lost. Number one, because hello, I grew up in Asia. I didn't grow up I mean, I'm Hispanic. And so, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why they chose me to do the role is my last name is Chavez. okay, but I mean, I literally grew up in Malaysia, and so I had no innate knowledge or familiarity with what it's like to grow up Hispanic in maybe a poor neighborhood and all of this. And I felt so much pressure to try to create this from nowhere. I did a lot of research and whatnot, but it was very difficult. And in addition to that, although they specifically wanted an opera singer sound, they wrote me pop music for my role. My lines were very, very modern, very pop-like. And so I spent much of the time feeling like, guys, am I giving you what you wanted? Am I anything like what you imagine? I mean, it was like, so that was the other end of the spectrum in a way. And I mean, I feel good about it, but it was, I don't think I ever got to feel really confident that I am Glenda. You know, it's never really got there. So.
Yeah, well, I just think it would be, I would feel very daunted by, especially a role like that, like creating something completely from scratch.
Yeah.
But I guess, like I said, maybe liberating also. When you've talked about how a lot of these new operas were based on books. Is that something that's important to you to like go read the book and like sort of study up on the characters, or would you rather sort of come at it fresh, sort of?
I think, I certainly, if there is source material, I want to acquaint myself with it. But it's interesting because when we come to the role of Carmen, you know, the opera Carmen is loosely based on the novella by Prosper Mérimée called Carmen. But in truth, I think the opera, the story of the opera is vastly different, even to the point where I feel like the characters are different. First of all, the novella concentrates much more on José and his story, whereas the opera is much more about Carmen and her story. And so in a way, it's helpful to know the evolution of the piece. But when I come to interpreting the role of Carmen, for me, the opera is the source material, because the thing is that there was such an interpretation given to how a melodic line was set and with what words, and you can't take that away, you know. So I believe that Bizet's interpretation of the character of Carmen is very different from Mérimée's, and I have to go based on what Bizet wrote. So I'm picky and choosy, I guess.
Well, I guess you have to be. So one of the projects I think is super interesting that I'd love to learn more about that you've been doing is this project called Carmen Inside Out. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I'd love to, Ben. And it's so interesting because you talked about, you know, what the idea of me perhaps having different ways of looking at a certain character than the director might, and this and that. And this is the reason why Carmen Inside Out exists. So, I mean, I actually had a friend who said, hey, you know, Kirstin, maybe you could come do some little version of Carmen for me here in London next summer. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can bring, you know, a tenor and a baritone. She's like, well, it'd be a lot cheaper if it was just you. And I'm like, so I called up my friend Jonathan Pape, who runs the opera program at Boston Conservatory. And he and I had done Dead Man Walking together. And I just fell in love with him and his style of directing and just his brain, the whole 9 yards. And I thought, you know, if I approach Jonathan with this idea of doing Carmen by myself, and he laughs his socks off and says, no, Kirstin, you can't do that. I'll know that's true. I'll know it. I'll let go. I'll move on. It'll be great. So I called him up and I said, so, you know, Jonathan, I was thinking of maybe doing Carmen, but like a one-woman show version. And he's like, oh, yeah. And then when we do this, then we can do that. And we'll start it like this. And I'm like, oh, no. He thinks we can do it, so we'll do it. And that was 3 years ago. And the thing is that I made it really clear to Jonathan, and we discussed it because we were both on the same page. one of the things that was super important to me to bake into Carmen Inside Out was to tell Carmen's story the way I see it. And I say the way I see it, that sounds a little bit arrogant. I don't mean it to, but I've lived with Carmen for 20 years and I've seen her in a lot of different ways. And the one thing that would continue to irk me as we would go on is when a director would present her as some sort of prostitute, low class, no class person who didn't care about anything. And I just lose it. I lose it when that happens, because I know that the audience is completely cheated. They will never get the heart of the story if that is the way that Carmen is presented. I see her as someone with a real sense of joie de vivre, a joy of living. And in the first 2 acts of the opera, she's in her element. She is sunshine itself. She is living the life. She is happy as can be. And it's not just because I say so, it's because that's how Bizet said her text.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of the opera, you know, when you don't see Carmen and everybody's like, wait, where's Carmen? We want Carmen here. And I'm here to say, okay, so if she actually is some sort of witchy, nasty person, you think that the entire cast would be saying, where's Carmen? We want Carmen.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I don't get it. Oh, it just makes me insane. And so there've been a number of times where, you know, a director will say to me, okay, now Kirstin, you know, this is where you kicked Zuniga in the pants. And I'm like, did he slap me? Did he what? Did he spit in my face? And so I reacted in this way? No, she just did it. Why? Just because, you know, Carmen. Like, I can't stand it. I can't stand it. And it doesn't hold water. It doesn't. So when we conceived of this Carmen Inside Out project together, the primary goal was to tell her story. And so we have basically a 60-minute show where I sing all of the great melodies, and I have text that I deliver during some of the times. There's music throughout underneath, either with orchestra or with piano. And the text, I've done it in English, in French, and Spanish. So I tend to sing most of the music in French as it's written, but the text helps to illuminate what the French text is, so that regardless, you're going to be able to understand the story. But the whole idea was to give a really clear picture of what I feel like her experience is as these things are happening, because I feel like I understand her as a person. And I think that when we present her as a person that people can actually relate to, that the story just goes so much further. Yeah. So I think we've had some good success. I'd like to see more. I'm hoping for more. But yeah, it's a big passionate project of mine.
And did I read correctly that there's even like flamenco dancing in it?
Oh, yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. I'm not sure how my flamenco dancer, Sol Correaos, who lives in New York, she would probably have a few things to say. Oh, Kirstin, ¿dónde está el pie? ¿Cómo? Yeah, so we worked hard. We worked hard to get it up, but we're going to have to work again. We have to refresh periodically because, you know, she's just watching her. She's just amazing. But she was so wonderful in helping me to choreograph in such a way. I mean, it's a tiring show, right? It's 60 minutes of just me dancing, singing, acting, blah, blah, blah. And so we had to be careful to not overdo certain moments that would then make it impossible for me to sing, you know, 2 minutes later because my heart rate is through the roof or something. So she was great about that. And just, you know, a lot of it is the flavor that you give and the way that the body is held and the presentation of the face and the shoulders and, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, it sounds amazing. Just to go back for a second, we do have in the chat from something we talked about earlier, Alexi put the link to the performance of We Shall Not Be Moved with Opera
Oh,
Philadelphia. So,
thank you, Alexi.
so for anybody who's watching, who's interested in seeing it and learning more about it, you can just, copy that link for later. And is there a place where people can find out more about Carmen Inside Out also? Would that be your website maybe?
My website, which is kchavez.com, but also we have a Carmen Inside Out website, www.carmeninsideout.com. Who knew? So we're updating it. We were supposed to do performances in Japan this past June. They have now been delayed till next July. But I think we're going to be doing some performances in North Carolina also, and we're looking to expand. Definitely you guys are going to have us come do it in California, so I'm not worried about that.
Yeah,
as soon as possible.
We also had a question from Amira about Carmen Inside Out. She wanted to know, when you perform it, is it changed so that the whole thing is from Carmen's perspective? Or are you embodying the other roles and sort of providing multiple characters?
The entire thing is from Carmen's perspective. So there are various moments where I'm referring to other characters, and I try to make it very clear where they are when I see them. It's a really fascinating thing, Ben, I'll share with you. It basically, you've heard that saying that right before the moment that you die, your life passes before you, and you see your entire life pass before you. I've never experienced that. I can see that you haven't either, and this is good. But Carmen did. And so it was Jonathan's brilliant idea that the show, Carmen Inside Out, actually begins at the moment that she is dying. And so you see her, and she is dead on the stage, seemingly. But the whole show is this flashback of her life.
Interesting.
So it's all a memory of seeing José over there and seeing Escamillo over there, and they're fighting, and her reacting to it as if it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
But we go from the moment of her death, and she sings the card aria. That's kind of the first thing that you hear. And then we circle back to the habanera, and we go all the way through the show until she dies again. So
wow, it sounds fascinating.
Oh God, Jonathan is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I think it really holds water.
All concert producers who are watching, take note. And as a project that's really all your own, do you find that do you like sort of being not just performer, but also like producer of the concert, promote, it feels like you would have a lot of power in that way in terms of sort of creating it from the ground up. Do you like that?
I love that you asked that, Ben, because it has been the hardest aspect of the whole thing.
Really?
And here's why. I think the crux of the reason why is that I, as performer, I don't know that I could say anymore that I'm a shy person. I don't think I really am a shy person, but I certainly am not a person who goes on touting myself and patting myself on the back and talking about myself and selling myself and all of that. I hate that, truly, with a passion. And so to be in a situation where I'm trying to sell this show, which of course you'd think that I have no problem because I just made a shameless plug to you. So you'd think that was not difficult, but it is. And I don't do that well. And so I really struggled with that. And so when we were having actually difficulty finding venues to do the show, like we tried to find some musical festivals and whatnot, and there were a lot of no's that came through, and I think they just didn't quite understand what the show is. But I took it very personally, as we do, you know. And in this case, I don't really have an agent to buffer me from things that I would normally have. So I haven't enjoyed that. I don't mind having more say about how it's presented or all of this, but that's not my forte. And I really wish I had somebody to just, you know, take it over and run it and make it go and sell it. And
Yeah.
because that's not me. That's not what I'm good at. So yeah, that part hasn't been as much fun.
Yeah, I feel you with that. But sort of like I was saying to you before we actually started the Zoom, I think, you know, even though I think it's something a lot of musicians maybe wouldn't enjoy so much, and we sort of therefore don't do it. And I don't think it's really taught at schools as much as obviously the actual practice of music. I think ultimately, like what I have found, for example, is during this whole time of when everything's online and everything, all of our normal things are canceled, really the onus really does become a lot more on the performers themselves if you want opportunities to sort of make those happen yourself, even if it's not our favorite thing to do.
And you know, it's really interesting. I had a great experience this summer, amazingly. I think I was petrified about getting to the end of the pandemic, which of course now we can't even envision when that's going to be. But when this all started, I was really worried that we would get to the end of it and I would look back and think, wow, I had all this time and I wasted it. I was very worried about that. So of course I instantly got crazy busy, and now I'm like, do I get a vacation? Hello. So I've made myself a little bit insane. But one of the things that I did was I took a couple classes online, like official classes. One of them was in financial planning because that's part of my background. And I use that information a lot with young singers and whatnot. But I also took a class in entrepreneurship. And it was very illuminating, because the thing about it, Ben, is that we are entrepreneurs. That's what we are. But we don't think of ourselves as small business owners, entrepreneurs, to the degree that we should. So for example, if I were to be able to look at, you know, trying to market Carmen Inside Out, if I could step outside myself, put on a different hat and say, okay, now I'm entrepreneur Kirstin, how am I going to market this? Okay, that person said no. Okay, let's go on to this. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Instead of being Kirstin the performer, who's deeply offended and hurt, and then is immobilized because she's deeply offended and hurt. So it's been really fascinating to think about rewiring our brains to, I mean, it's amazing all that we have to do really as freelance musicians and things like that. It's kind of ridiculous. We have to be small business owners, but I think we need to take it further. And I've started teaching that to my students because I think that's the only way to make it work now. You know, we're not going to have situations where most musicians coming through the schools are going to then just be able to support themselves strictly as musicians. I don't think that that's realistic. I think that we have to expand. I think we have to be much more entrepreneurial. I think we have to start thinking about multiple income streams so that one thing can support another. I just made my first paycheck as a creative writer. It went into my bank account last week. It was 6 cents. But I am so proud of that 6 cents, man. Dude, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, and I think it's great too that like I went to the New England Conservatory for school, and I know that since then they actually now have a whole department all about basically musical entrepreneurship and how to market yourself, how to value yourself, how to you know, all the sort of business of being a musician that I think a lot of times is sort of swept under the rug because it feels sort of antithetical to the art that we're doing. Right. But that's really important, and like you said, more and more important as people have to sort of put together their own career that's not going to look like anyone else's or anything that came before, and you have to be really creative with it.
Right.
So we have another clip I'd like to share.
Great.
And I'd be interested to hear, so you were so nice to send me these beautiful performances. This one is of the habanera from Carmen. And I'm very interested about the setting and sort of the story behind how this was made.
Okay.
So let's see. Well, will you tell us first, and then I'll show it?
So is this the habanera?
It looks like on a rooftop.
Got it. All right. So I was asked a few weeks ago to offer an aria, to record an aria, a video version of an aria. And because I'm over the top, and because I couldn't imagine just, you know, like sitting in my living room, singing the habanera, you know, I thought, well, whatever. And so I have these my two best friends. We're in an isolation bubble together, and they live next door. It's just, thank you. And so I, you know, commandeered them to videotape me. And so then it was like, well, then we should go away. We should do it on your rooftop, and we should get you in costume. Well, I don't want to give you too many gory details about the two of them trying to get me into my corset, but let me just say it took a half an hour and a lot of effort. Anyway, yeah, so that was fun. But anyway, so that rooftop is my rooftop in my house where I am right now. The backdrop are some of our wonderful mountains here in Salt Lake. And, you know, I sort of went with that concept from my show, Carmen Inside Out, and played the habanera in that way. And it worked well, to the point where I was like, wonder if maybe I should do the whole show this way. I don't know. Things are brewing. We'll see. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, so the habanera from Carmen on Kirstin's rooftop.
Si tu
tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime. Mais si je t'aime, prends garde à toi. That girl. Boy.
Amazing. And what a backdrop.
Right? I know. It's a little bit hot to be out there very much, but we did it right at sunset, so it wasn't too blaring.
That was amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm curious, you know, like I said at the top, in addition to you sort of being a very prolific singer in the world of opera, you also do a lot of concert performances like Beethoven 9, Defia, which obviously is also singing, but in a less maybe physically demonstrative way, you know, no sets, I would assume less physical acting. Do you have a preference between the two? And does it feel weird to go from the world of opera, where you are doing what you're saying, like creating characters, you know, sort of from the ground up in a holistic way, to standing in front of an orchestra in a little more of a sort of static way?
You know, it's interesting. It's like a different genre altogether, even though I use the same instrument for it. But I think that for me, even in concert, I am character driven. So I very much try to engage, knowing, of course, the limits upon my physicality, but I very much try to engage in a character. I think that I can't think of a time when that wasn't helpful or suitable. I think it always works.
Yeah.
Some of the moments that are more difficult are, for example, I got to do the Mahler Second Symphony twice last summer, and that's been a dream of mine for many, many years. So I was so grateful to get to do that, an astounding piece. And in both instances, the conductor was very kind and didn't bring me in until after the third movement. But the fourth movement is also pretty long. And so the challenge of sitting there, trying not to be distracting, but trying to look engaged, which it's not difficult in that kind of piece, right? But you want to also almost be like some sort of conduit for the music to just come through you, even if it's just through your face as you're sitting there. Because if you're sitting there looking bored or thinking about your laundry or did you leave the stove on, you know, I mean, people can see you. So that I find a little bit difficult, and I might err on the side of emoting too much. I don't know. I've never really gotten feedback about that, but I think that's my job. My job is to act regardless. And if I'm singing something, then I must have some sort of character to base it on.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes total sense. So I want to talk a little about, you know, you have been, in addition to all your many other accolades, correct me if this is the wrong title, the artist in residence, right, at University of Utah.
Yes.
For the last, I think you said 5 years.
This is my 5th year, so I've done it for 4.
This is your 5th year. Okay, done it for 4. Amazing. And I think I've just always been sort of fascinated by the profession of teaching something like voice, because again, we were talking about this earlier, you know, if you're playing the violin or teaching the violin, everything you just point and say, your finger needs to do this, or your vibrato, change it like this, or, you know, your bow hold, whatever. And with singing, it seems like a very large portion of what you do is inside and internal. Yeah. And so I would imagine that would maybe make teaching very different. And I would think also trickier in a lot of ways. Is like, how do you approach teaching a student and like helping them with fundamentals when so much of it is like in their vocal cords?
Well, it's such a good statement, Ben. You're absolutely right. It is very complicated. But the thing that we have to base everything on is sensation. What does it feel like? And the problem with that is when you get a young singer coming in, say a freshman, they have no idea how they can't, for example, when I'm on stage, I can be looking up into the rafters and I can tell you, I'm sorry, that's the doggy barking. I can tell you what my foot is doing without looking at my foot. I know what my foot is doing. I can picture it. I see it in my mind's eye, all that. So that's a certain level of body awareness that is absolutely fundamentally critical to what we do. And this is something that makes the teaching of singing so complicated with young singers, because they don't have that level of awareness. So, I mean, it's one thing to have that level of awareness for a part of you that's exterior, a foot, for example. Mm-hmm. But to then bring that into a level of awareness of what is my tongue exactly doing? What is the back of my tongue doing when I sing this vowel? What is the front of my tongue doing when I sing this vowel? And that's where we have to get to. So my job as teacher is to ask them to do things in such a way that they will eventually experience making the kind of sound that I want them to make. And then I ask them to zero in on what that felt like. And then we try to repeat. Because the only thing we can ever do is build on our sensory, sensual, sensation memory of what it is to make a good sound. And the thing is that it happens on multiple levels. So obviously I don't manipulate my vocal cords specifically, but I very much alter with tiny degrees of difference the shape inside my mouth, the shape outside my mouth, the engagement of muscles here need to be zilch, which is the opposite of what you want to do, because you want to be like, ugh. The engagement in the core musculature has to be very intense and constant. The breathing, all of that. It's a lot to take in. So that's why it takes us so long, and that's why most good singers, even ones who've been professionals for many years, are never without a teacher or at least a really, really good coach, because you constantly need to have that refinement, that help, that feedback, since it's nothing that you can touch or manipulate in the real world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so I've also been curious, and I think we had a question submitted about this also. How does any given singer, like as you're developing, how do you determine what your voice type is? And at what age does that usually happen? Do you find students who are already in the university who then are still like changing or figuring out what that's going to be?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the traps out there for young singers is to worry too much about what your voice type is. For many of us, it's obvious. I was singing tenor in high school. And so, it wasn't that far to go to become an alto mezzo. So that was something that was true all of my life. But there are a lot of soprano mezzos who actually could end up choosing one or the other, depending on the repertoire that pleases them more, or that sort of thing. So it's important that young singers not feel too rushed. If there's any question, that's fine. For example, in the soprano, mezzo-soprano realm, there are plenty of opera roles, for example, that go either way, where sometimes a mezzo sings it, sometimes a soprano sings it. And I would say, doing that kind of repertoire and doing song repertoire where it doesn't matter at all what voice type you are typically. It's much more important to develop a solid vocal technique and one that brings out the natural qualities of the sound, because then after that's developed, it generally becomes much more clear what the voice type is. And in some cases, for example, a mezzo-soprano voice is not going to reach full maturity until something like 40 most likely. And it might be that the mezzo-soprano at 40 or beyond, and I certainly fall into this category, would then start doing different repertoire. For example, Verdi, and in my case, the Dalila from Samson and Delilah. You know, we can move into that repertoire, which we wouldn't have been able to do at a younger age because the orchestration is too big and the color isn't right. But the voice changes with time and with physical maturity. So it's not something that we need to rush. And I mean, ideally, a healthy singer who sings well and who does the right repertoire for them should be singing into their 60s potentially. So it's not anything you want to be like, I gotta figure this out. And, you know, I've known several very successful singers who started out as one thing and changed and were able to make a transition into a different voice type. So Placido Domingo, hello. He was tenor most of the time, and I just sang with him as a baritone. So
wow,
can be done. It can be done.
Well, and it's just fascinating when really your body is your instrument. And I think just sort of not trying to box it in that makes a lot of sense. I'm just sort of going with what it naturally wants to do. We had a couple questions related to something I wanted to talk to you about anyway, which was very convenient. I think both Teddy and Amira asked this question. You know, as an opera singer, you know, we've talked a lot about how acting is a critical component of it, in addition to the singing itself, or maybe hand in hand with that. And they were both wondering, as an opera singer, do you go through much training in acting, or are you focusing on singing? And I guess also then, how do you prioritize that for your students also?
Really, really good questions. And I have to say, and I think it is still the case, but certainly when I went through school for a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, I think that the specific acting training was woefully inadequate. And I find that to be the case across the board. I mean, I'm sure that there are exceptions, different schools to think differently, but you know, it's interesting. We come from a time, we have a point in our history as an American opera school where it was okay to do something that we call park and bark, where you would literally, you know, whatever, blah, 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 and blah, blah sings, and then I sing, and I go to center stage, downstage, and I stand there and I sing because that's where I'm going to be best heard, and I'm not going to worry about acting, and my colleagues can do whatever they want. And we had that sort of attitude in our art form here in this country. I can't really speak for in Europe. I don't think it was as prevalent. And so the emphasis was almost entirely on singing and the voice. And I think that this had a very negative effect for a couple of reasons. Number one, it made listeners and singers hyper stressed about every single note. Is every single note correct? And I mean, you know, critics and I mean, all sorts of people out there saying, oh my gosh, you know, everything was beautiful, but that high A, man, that just really, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, this person sang for 2 hours and all you care about is this one note. I mean, anyway, so I think that was a huge mistake for us as an art form, as having any kind of popularity in the world. But also it then meant that young singers were like, I don't have time to worry about acting. I gotta be completely focused on the singing. And then we shot ourselves in the foot again because, you know, we're now competing with movies. We're competing with Broadway. We're competing with all sorts of other media where acting, oh, by the way, does matter. And it does matter if you look like the character that you're playing. And it does, you know, and so we're playing catch up and scrambling to catch up. But I don't think schools have yet caught up to the whole acting thing. I mean, a lot of schools have opera workshop, and I know that various directors of opera workshops, they make effort, but kids should be taking just acting classes. I mean, or lessons, or because I literally consider myself 50% singer, 50% actor. And I'm very fortunate because I had a background in acting in high school. And I did competitions and all sorts of things. And so I had a solid background in that before I even began studying classical singing. But most folks don't fall into that category. And so I always encourage my students, well, we work on it in my studio, of course, and they know how important it is to me. But I always encourage my students to go and find other opportunities to study acting, whether that be in the theater department or whatever, or to take lessons. So it's something I feel extremely passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, especially like you said, and not just Broadway and movies, but also like the Met HD productions where
yeah,
a lot of focus on the visuals and the presentation of it.
Right. Absolutely.
So we had a question from Ildiko who wants to know if you've ever studied with Marilyn Horne.
One of my sadnesses is I have not. I have not. Yeah, she and I have never crossed paths, unfortunately. I still hold out hope. You guys bring me over to where you are and maybe I'll get to meet her too. That would be great. Academy of the West.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And then Elaine wants to know the opening clip from the Graz opera of Carmen. She wants to know, she said, first of all, it sounds amazing and wants to know if it's available online.
No.
Like the rest of the performance.
No. And in fact, you guys, oh my God, I got in so much trouble when I put those clips on my website. Graza Oper, said Kirstin. If you leave them up there, we will find you something like 3,000 euros. The reason is,
wow.
Ben, you probably know about this. Orchestras don't like to not be paid when they're heard. That is the reason why you will very rarely find clips of opera singers with orchestras on their websites.
Very interesting.
I have, I think, one from Thérèse Raquin, Tobias Picker at San Diego Opera from quite a while ago. But yeah, no, those Grazer clips, I'm sorry, that's a one-time only. They're not available.
Well, it means we get an exclusive here, so it's great.
Right.
And speaking of which,
Grazer Opera that I showed him to you. Okay, it's our secret.
Absolutely beautiful. You, thank you so much.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you a million times.
Hopefully we'll see you very shortly. Like I said, not on a Zoom screen, although this has been great. And thank you to everybody who's been watching. Super fun. Hope you enjoyed the last hour. We'll be back next Wednesday at 5 p.m. our new time with violinist Paul Huang. So it'll be a very exciting one as well. So thank you, Kirstin. And yeah, I ditto what Amira says. Come perform with PSO soon.
Yes. I say yes.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you
Bye,
all
everybody.
so very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.